go up to 28 miles an hour. They weigh twice as much as conventional bicycles. And there is pressure now for them to be licensed and drivers to be insured. So Tony Campbell is Chief Executive of the Motorcycle Industry Association, who's got very strong views on e-bikes. Tony, morning. We know more and more accidents now are involving e-bikes. They can go up to speeds of 28 miles an hour. There's simply no regulation at all.
I'll just sort of stand you slightly corrected. There is some regulation, but it's whether it is fit for purpose.
Yeah.
The e-bikes which are legal to be used on the road are up to 250 watt, and they have pedal assistance, which allows them only to go to 15.5 mile an hour, at which point the assistance should cut off. At the same time, there should be no assistance other than the initial start, that they should be powered at all. So in other words, you should always be pedaling. What we're seeing more and more, and now I would say in widespread use, is where these products are either modified or there are products which are outside of the regulation that are being sold and people are buying them, which and using them, of course, whereby they don't meet the regulation. And you made a reference to 28 mile an hour. Now, there are products available on the market, which strictly speaking are for private land use only, that can actually perform to way beyond 28 mile an hour. And this is what we're seeing more and more in use. So from our perspective, effectively, they're motorcycles. They should be treated as such. I think the challenge here is how they are policed. And at the moment, we're seeing a situation where the current regulation isn't being policed. And therefore, what we need to see is a review of that regulation and make it easier for the police and enforcement to actually enforce the laws.
Tony, it's so interesting for me, this story. I have a dog in this fight. So my 18-year-old who hadn't taken his driving test convinced me that rather than having a bicycle to get to and from work every morning, he needed an electric bicycle because it involves some pretty steep hills. And I, stupidly, went along with the idea, thinking it might delay him doing his driving test, which frankly worries me a little bit as well, living in London. I quite quickly realised he agreed to wear a helmet. He was wearing a helmet on it all the time. I spent £120 on the best possible helmet I could find for him. He'd already been through 2 of them. And then he came off it, going too fast, coming down a hill, not understanding the speed, and broke his collarbone. It's now in our garage with a buckled wheel, and I'm under no intention of getting it fixed at the moment. But I think what's happened is there's so much naivety about them, so little information for parents like me who might be buying them for our teens and maybe helping out someone in their 20s can't afford a car. It looks like a really sensible thing to do, and it's dangerous. Why have they been allowed on the roads with no regulation? How is this? Have they got away with this, these companies?
Well, there is regulation that exists. It's just that I think the companies want to avoid complying with the regulation. The category is actually L1EA. And what that regulation does, it accommodates bicycles which are of higher power. However, that said, they should still be limited to 15.5 mile an hour. And there is a requirement for licensing and protective wear. Now, of course, at the moment, it's very, very difficult. You can have 2 products which look identical to each other. One would comply with current regulation and therefore the laws of use, and the other one simply doesn't. So this situation has been created where people are using what purports to be an assisted pedal cycle, which is what the regulation says, but actually they're using a motorcycle. And if it's categorized as a motorcycle, it should be what's called whole vehicle type approved. You should be wearing a helmet, you should have a license, you should be insured, and the vehicle should be registered. But of course, if you can't tell the difference between an e-bike, which is legal, so up to 250 watt, pedal assisted up to 15.5 mile an hour, and a bicycle that performs like a motorcycle, then it's a bit of a challenge for the authorities to be able to do anything about it. So what we're asking for is there needs to be a regulatory review. In fact, the government in last year in the Queen's speech announced there was a paper that was that was announced to do a regulation review for vehicles, and to accommodate these new products and new types. And of course, we're not talking about e-scooters today, which are another challenge, but to get some regulation that's fit for purpose, but also allows some new categories of the market. And unfortunately, Beth, you've fallen prey to that situation with your son, and it's unfortunate to hear about it.
I have. Can I also just ask you quickly, but would you like to see similar regulations to, of course, we have these Lime bikes and other bicycles that you can hire on your app. Those are electric bikes. They're all over the pavements at the moment. I mean, if you're in a wheelchair, you've got a pram, they're a total nightmare where I live. They're pretty fast and dangerous as well, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. I would go as far as saying that the higher scheme bicycles or the e-bikes and also the e-step scooters, they would all comply with the current regulation. Now, that then brings us back to the question, is the current regulation correct? Is it the right thing to mix those types of products with both pedestrians and with other cyclists? And then, of course, if they're displaced into the main flow of traffic, is that then safe? So that's why we're saying that there has to be a regulatory review. Just picking up on your point, Beth, when you decided to buy an e-bike, obviously an e-bike is not a cheap purchase. And in fact, you can buy an electric moped, which is completely legal, does require a license. You have to be 16 currently to use one of those, but they are built to a standard that then complies with all of the regulations and laws that are in place.
Yeah, it would have been probably the safer thing to do. Thank you, Tony. Fascinating. Tony Campbell, Chief Executive of the Motorcycle Industry Association.